6 months later, Maria stood in front of her new classroom, listening to the excited chatter of her students. The specialized school for children with learning differences had hired her after hearing about her innovative teaching methods. The tutoring job David had arranged had led to this full-time position, and Maria had never been happier in her work. Her relationship with David had grown slowly and carefully. They had been honest with each other about their fears and challenges. David worried about putting Maria in the public spotlight, while Maria struggled with feeling worthy of someone from such a different world. But their connection had proven stronger than their doubts. The media attention had been intense when their relationship became public. Photographers followed them, reporters asked intrusive questions, and social media buzzed with opinions about the president's son dating a blind woman. Some people called it inspiring, others called it a publicity stunt. David and Maria learned to ignore both the praise and the criticism. Maria had been surprised by how many people reached out to share their own stories of overcoming disabilities or finding love in unexpected places. She started getting invitations to speak at schools and community events. Her message was simple, that setbacks don't define us, and that everyone deserves to be loved for who they truly are. The weekend market had become their special place. They still went there together most Saturdays, and all the vendors now knew their story. Mrs. Chen had become like a grandmother to Maria, always asking about her work and making sure she ate enough. Roberto saved the best bread for them and refused to let them pay full price, saying their love story was good for business. David had learned to navigate Maria's world just as she had learned about his. He practiced guide techniques and learned more Braille. He understood her need for independence and her occasional frustrations with well-meaning but misguided help from others. He had become her advocate in situations where people treated her as less capable because of her blindness. Maria had also adapted to David's public life. She learned to handle security protocols and formal events. She discovered that her natural warmth and honesty made her popular with diplomats and politicians who were tired of superficial conversations. Her unique perspective often brought fresh insights to policy discussions about disability rights and education. The tutoring student, Sarah, had become like a little sister to Maria. The 12-year-old had been struggling with severe shyness and self-doubt, but working with Maria had transformed her confidence. Sarah learned that challenges could be overcome with patience and creativity. She even learned some Braille and became one of Maria's biggest supporters. President Harrison had been skeptical of his son's relationship at first, worried about political implications and Maria's motives. But after spending time with her, he had become one of her strongest advocates. He often sought her advice on education policy and disability legislation. Maria's influence on his family had led to several important policy changes. 1 year after their first meeting at the market, David proposed to Maria in the most perfect way possible. He arranged for them to return to the exact spot where he had found her cane that first day. As she stood there remembering how lost and hopeless she had felt, David knelt down and placed a ring in her hands. The ring was specially designed with raised patterns she could feel, and he had learned to ask her father's permission in Braille. When Maria said yes through happy tears, the entire market erupted in cheers. Mrs. Chen cried, Roberto played romantic music on his phone, and even the usually stern fish vendor smiled and offered them free salmon for their engagement dinner. Their wedding was a beautiful blend of both their worlds. It was held in the Rose Garden at the White House, but the ceremony included readings from children at Maria's school and music performed by students with disabilities. Maria's wedding dress had subtle textural details she could appreciate through touch, and David's vows were written in both print and Braille. As Maria stood at the altar, listening to David promise to love and support her dreams, she thought about the journey that had brought them together. Losing her sight had felt like the end of her story, but it had actually been the beginning of something more beautiful than she could have imagined. Their story became a symbol of hope for people facing their own challenges. Maria and David proved that love sees beyond surface differences, that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes our greatest struggles lead us to our greatest joys. They showed the world that everyone deserves to be loved completely and without conditions. In the months that followed their wedding, Maria continued teaching and advocating for disability rights. David supported her work while continuing his own education and public service. They faced challenges like any couple, but they faced them together, with the same patience and understanding that had brought them together in that crowded market. Years later, when people asked Maria about meeting the president's son, she always corrected them with a smile. She hadn't met the president's son that day in the market. She had met David, a kind stranger who had helped her find her cane and, in doing so, had helped her find herself again. The rest, she would say, was just a beautiful bonus to the love story that had begun with simple human kindness. The days between Wednesday and Saturday crawled by like years. Maria found herself unable to concentrate on anything except her confusing feelings about David. She researched President Harrison online using her talking computer, learning about his family and policies. She discovered that David had a reputation for being private and studious, often avoiding the spotlight that followed his younger sister. Maria's emotions changed by the hour. Sometimes she felt angry that he had deceived her, even if he had good reasons. Other times she felt embarrassed, imagining that his kindness had been motivated by pity. But in her quieter moments, she remembered the genuine warmth in his voice and the way he had treated her with such natural respect. By Friday night, Maria had decided not to go to the market. She felt too confused and overwhelmed to face David. But Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching her mood perfectly. She realized she needed groceries whether she wanted to see David or not. She couldn't let her personal drama keep her from taking care of herself. The market was less crowded than usual because of the rain. Maria went through her shopping routine mechanically, buying only essentials and avoiding conversation with the friendly vendors. She kept listening for David's voice but heard nothing. Part of her felt relieved, but a bigger part felt disappointed. She was almost finished shopping when she heard familiar footsteps approaching. David's voice called her, name softly, uncertainly. When she turned toward him, he asked if they could talk. Maria felt her resolve weakening at the genuine concern in his tone, but she managed to say she wasn't ready. David respected her answer, but asked if he could at least help her with her groceries one more time. He said he understood if she never wanted to see him again, but he couldn't stand the thought of her struggling alone with heavy bags in the rain. Against her better judgment, Maria agreed. As they walked through the market together, David talked continuously in a low, earnest voice. He explained that his security detail was always nearby, but tried to stay invisible when he was having personal time. He said he had been coming to this market alone for months, enjoying the anonymity and normalcy it provided. He told her about growing up in the public eye, about never knowing if people liked him for himself or because of his father's position. He described the loneliness of always being watched, always having to be careful about what he said and did. He said meeting Maria had been like finding an oasis of genuine human connection. David admitted that he should have told her who he was from the beginning, but he had been selfish. For the first time in years, someone was talking to him like a regular person. Someone was sharing their real thoughts and feelings without any agenda. He said he had fallen for her honesty and strength, not despite her blindness, but because of how she had faced her challenges. As they reached the bus stop, David made a confession that stunned Maria. He said he had already spoken to the family about tutoring, and they were very interested in meeting her. But more than that, he had been thinking about ways to help her get back into teaching if that was what she wanted. He said her insights about education and working with children were too valuable to waste. The bus was approaching when David did something that broke down Maria's remaining defenses. He said that if she never wanted to see him again, he would respect that completely. But he asked her to please not give up on the tutoring opportunity or other chances to rebuild her career just because they came through him. He said she deserved every good thing that could happen to her. As Maria boarded the bus, David handed her a piece of paper with his phone number written in Braille. He said a friend had helped him learn to write it properly. He told her to call, if she wanted to talk, or even if she just needed help with anything practical. No strings attached, no expectations. During the ride home, Maria's fingers traced over the Braille dots of his phone number. The fact that he had taken the time to learn how to write in Braille for her spoke louder than all his words. It showed a level of thoughtfulness and effort that went beyond mere politeness or pity. That evening, Maria sat in her small apartment holding David's phone number and thinking about everything he had said. She realized that her blindness had made her overly suspicious of people's motives. She had been so focused on protecting herself from pity that she might be rejecting genuine caring. She thought about how David had never once treated her like she was broken or helpless. He had asked her opinions, laughed at her jokes, and sought her advice. He had made her feel valued and interesting. Those things couldn't be faked, no matter what his motives might have been. Maria also realized that she had been defining herself entirely by her disability lately. She had forgotten that she was still the same person who had loved teaching, who had dreams and goals, who had once been confident and social. Maybe David saw those parts of her that she had been hiding from herself. Late that night, Maria made a decision that would change the course of both their lives. She picked up her phone and carefully dialed the number David had given her. When he answered on the second ring, as if he had been waiting by the phone, she simply said she would like to meet that family about tutoring. The relief and joy in David's voice was unmistakable. They talked for 2 hours that night, and Maria began to believe that sometimes the most unexpected connections turn out to be exactly what we need. Wednesday afternoon couldn't come fast enough for Maria. She changed her clothes 3 times, finally settling on a simple blue dress that her sister had always said brought out her eyes. She practiced the route to the cafe twice, wanting to arrive confidently and on time. The cafe was busier than she expected, filled with the sounds of conversations, clinking cups, and gentle jazz music. Maria found an empty table near the window and ordered tea while she waited. Her hands trembled, slightly with nervous excitement. It had been over a year since she had been on anything resembling a date. David arrived exactly on time, and Maria heard him speak briefly to someone near the entrance before approaching her table. When he sat down, she noticed something different about the atmosphere around them. The conversations at nearby tables seemed to quiet down, and she could sense people looking in their direction. David seemed to notice too because he suggested they move to a quieter corner table in the back. As they relocated, Maria heard whispers and felt the weight of curious stares. She asked David if everything was all right, and he assured her it was fine, just said the cafe was busier than usual. Once they were settled in their new spot, their conversation flowed as easily as it had at the market. David asked about her, weak, and listened intently as Maria described her small daily victories. Successfully cooking a new recipe, organizing her closet, learning a new route to the library. He celebrated these achievements as if they were major accomplishments. When David mentioned the tutoring opportunity again, Maria felt a surge of hope. He explained that the family lived in an upscale neighborhood and had a 12-year-old daughter who was struggling with confidence in school. They were less concerned about academic help and more interested in someone who could inspire their child to overcome challenges. The conversation was interrupted when a well-dressed man approached their table. He spoke quietly to David, calling him by a different name, something that sounded like Sir, or a title Maria couldn't quite catch. David excused himself for a moment and stepped away with the man for what appeared to be an urgent conversation. When David returned, he seemed different, more tense and formal. He apologized for the interruption and said something had come up that required his attention. Maria felt disappointed, assuming their coffee date was ending early. But instead of leaving, David did something unexpected. He reached across the table and gently took her hand. His voice became serious as he said there was something important he needed to tell her. Maria's heart began to race, wondering if he was married or involved with someone else. She braced herself for bad news. David began by saying that he hadn't been completely honest about who he was. He said his full name was David Harrison and that his father worked in government. Maria waited for him to continue, not understanding why this seemed so difficult for him to say. Then he said the words that changed everything. His father was President Harrison. David was the president's son. The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She pulled her hand away and sat back in her chair, trying to process what she had just heard. The president's son had been helping her shop for vegetables and carrying her groceries. The president's son had asked her on a coffee date. David quickly continued talking, explaining that he often tried to go out alone without security when possible, that he valued normal interactions with people who didn't know who he was. He said meeting her had been the most genuine connection he had felt with anyone in years. He begged her not to let his identity change how she felt about their friendship. But Maria was overwhelmed. Suddenly everything made sense. The whispers, the stares, the man who had interrupted them, the way vendors at the market seemed to recognize him. She had been naive to think a stranger would be so consistently kind without some ulterior motive. Maria stood up quickly, her chair scraping against the floor. She fumbled for her cane, her hands shaking with embarrassment and confusion. David immediately stood too, reaching out to help her, but she pulled away. She said she needed time to think and started to leave. David followed her toward the door, speaking urgently but quietly. He said his feelings for her were completely real, that her blindness and his identity didn't matter to him. He said he had never met anyone as brave and inspiring as she was, but Maria couldn't hear his words through her own shock and doubt. At the cafe entrance, David caught up with her and gently touched her arm. He said he understood she was upset, but asked if they could talk more when she was ready. He said he would be at the market on Saturday as usual, hoping she would give him a chance to explain properly. Maria walked to the bus stop in a daze, her mind spinning with questions and emotions. The president's son was interested in her? It seemed impossible, like something from a fairy tale or a movie. But it also explained so much about their interactions that had puzzled her. On the bus ride home, Maria's emotions swung wildly between excitement and fear. Part of her felt flattered and amazed that someone so important could care about her. But another part felt deceived and wondered what his real motives could be. Did he pity her? Was she some kind of charity case for him? That night, Maria barely slept, replaying every conversation she had ever had with David and seeing it all in a completely new light. The following Saturday, Maria found herself looking forward to the market, for the first time since losing her sight. She told herself it was because she was getting better at shopping alone, but deep down, she hoped she might run into David again. She had thought about their conversation all week, remembering his patient voice and gentle manner. She arrived at her usual time and went through her shopping routine, but there was no sign of him. Mrs. Chen asked about her nice young man friend from the week before, which made Maria blush. She explained that David was just a kind stranger who had helped her, nothing more. But Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly and patted her hand. As Maria was finishing her shopping, she heard a familiar voice calling her name. Her heart jumped as David approached, sounding genuinely happy to see her again. He apologized for being late, explaining that he had been held up by some work obligations. The way he said work obligations sounded formal, like he was being careful with his words. David offered to help with her shopping again, and they fell into an easy conversation as they walked from stall to stall. He seemed more relaxed than the week before, asking about her life and work. When she told him about losing her teaching job, he became very interested in her thoughts about education and helping children learn. They talked about books they loved, places they wanted to travel, and their dreams for the future. Maria found herself sharing things she hadn't told anyone in months. David listened carefully to everything she said, asking thoughtful questions that showed he was really paying attention. He had opinions about literature and history that impressed her with their depth. When Maria mentioned that she was struggling financially, David became quiet for a moment. Then he asked if she had considered tutoring. He said he knew some families who were looking for help with their children's education. Maria laughed sadly and pointed to her eyes, reminding him that she couldn't see to help with homework or reading. David surprised her by saying that some of the most important lessons didn't require sight. He talked about teaching children to think critically, to ask questions, to develop empathy and understanding. He said her experience overcoming challenges could inspire young people in ways a typical tutor never could. The passion in his voice when he talked about education made Maria's heart race. By the time they reached the bus stop, David had convinced Maria to let him introduce her to one family who might be interested in her tutoring services. He said, they were good people who would appreciate her unique perspective. Maria was nervous but excited about the possibility of working again. As they waited for the bus, their conversation took a more personal turn. David asked about her family and where she grew up. Maria told him about her small hometown and her parents who ran a hardware store. When she asked about his family, David hesitated again before saying they were in business and politics. He quickly changed the subject. Just before the bus arrived, David did something unexpected. He asked if Maria would like to have coffee sometime during the week, not at the market, but somewhere quieter where they could talk more. Maria felt her cheeks burn with excitement and embarrassment. It had been so long since anyone had asked her on what sounded like a date. She said yes before she could talk herself out of it. They arranged to meet at a small cafe near the market on Wednesday afternoon. David described exactly where it was and offered to meet her at the bus stop to guide her there. Maria insisted she could find it herself, wanting to prove her independence. But she was touched by his thoughtfulness. After the bus arrived and Maria was seated, David leaned in through the window and said something that puzzled her. He said he hoped she would still want to have coffee with him after she learned more about him. Before she could ask what he meant, the bus pulled away. On the ride home, Maria replayed every moment of their conversation. She was excited about the possibility of tutoring work, but even more excited about seeing David again in a few days. She had no idea that at that very moment, David was making phone calls about security arrangements for their coffee date. She had no idea that meeting her was already changing his life in ways that would affect both of them forever. That night, Maria lay in bed thinking about David's voice, his kindness, and the mysterious things he sometimes said. She felt more hopeful about her future than she had since losing her sight. Something told her that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't even imagine. 3 weeks later, Maria was getting better at navigating the market. She had learned which vendors were friendly and which ones to avoid. Mrs. Chen at the vegetable stand always let her touch the produce to check for ripeness. Roberto at the bread stall saved the day-old loaves for her at half price. These small kindnesses kept her going. On this particular Saturday morning, the market was busier than usual. Maria later learned it was because of some political event happening nearby. She didn't pay much attention to politics anymore. Her world had become very small, focused just on getting through each day. She was feeling around for apples at Mrs. Chen's stall when disaster struck. Someone rushing past bumped into her hard, and her white cane went flying. Her carefully organized mental map of the market disappeared in an instant. She was lost in a sea of noise and confusion. Maria got down, on her hands and knees, searching desperately for her cane. People stepped around her, some muttering complaints about her being in the way. Panic rose in her chest. Without her cane, she was completely helpless. Tears started flowing down her cheeks, and she didn't care who saw them. The concrete was dirty and rough against her palms as she crawled around, reaching under stalls and between people's feet. Someone stepped on her fingers, and she cried out in pain. She felt more lost and vulnerable than she had since the day she went blind. All the progress she had made, all the confidence she had slowly built up, crumbled away, just when she was about to give up and call for help. She felt someone kneel down beside her. A gentle hand touched her shoulder, and a kind voice asked what she was looking for. She explained about her cane through her tears, and the stranger immediately began helping her search. He had a nice voice, warm and concerned, but not pitying. He spoke to her like she was a person, not just a disabled woman to be felt sorry for. When he found her cane under a fruit cart, he placed it carefully in her hands and helped her to her feet. He brushed the dirt off her jacket and asked if she was hurt. Maria was so grateful she could barely speak. She thanked him repeatedly, wiping her face and trying to regain some dignity. He asked if she needed help getting anywhere, and she admitted. She was a bit turned around. Without being asked, he gently took her arm and guided her back to familiar territory. As they walked, he made light conversation that helped calm her nerves. He asked about her favorite fruits and vegetables, mentioned that he was new to this market himself, and commented on how busy it was today. His voice was educated and refined, but not snobby. There was something comforting about his presence. When they reached Mrs. Chen's stall, he helped her find the apples she had been shopping for. He even helped her pick out the best ones, describing their color and firmness. Mrs. Chen seemed to know him and greeted him warmly in broken English mixed with Chinese. This surprised Maria because Mrs. Chen was usually shy around strangers. After Maria paid for her apples, the young man offered to help her with the rest of her shopping. She protested that she didn't want to be a burden, but he insisted it would be his pleasure. They spent the next hour going from stall to stall together. He described everything in detail: the bright red tomatoes, the golden corn, the purple, eggplants that looked like they were wearing royal robes. For the first time since losing her sight, shopping became enjoyable instead of stressful. He had a wonderful sense of humor and made her laugh several times. He told funny stories about his own cooking disasters and asked her advice about what vegetables went well together. He made her feel useful and normal. When her shopping was finished, he offered to help her carry her bags to the bus stop. As they walked, Maria realized she didn't even know his name. When she asked, he paused for just a moment before saying his friends called him David. Something about that pause made her curious, but she didn't press. Everyone had a right to privacy. At the bus stop, David waited with her until the bus arrived. He helped her board and made sure she had a seat near the front. As the bus pulled away, Maria heard him call out to have a wonderful week. She waved goodbye through the window, even though she couldn't see him. On the ride home, Maria felt lighter than she had in months. One stranger's kindness had restored her faith in humanity. She had no idea that David had watched her bus disappear around the corner, or that he had been thinking about her smile for the rest of the day. She also had no idea who he really was. Maria had always been independent. At 24, she worked as a teacher in a small-town school and lived alone in a tiny apartment above the local bakery. Her world changed forever on a rainy Tuesday morning when she woke up and couldn't see anything. The darkness was complete and terrifying. The doctors at the hospital spoke in hushed tones. A rare condition had stolen her sight overnight. They used big medical words that meant nothing to her except one thing: she would never see again. The weeks that followed were the hardest of her life. She had to learn everything again: how to walk without bumping into furniture, how to make coffee without burning herself, how to find her clothes in the closet. Her friends tried to help at first, but slowly they stopped visiting. They didn't know what to say or how to act around her. Maria understood, but it hurt deeply. Her family lived far away in another state, and she had always been too proud to ask for help. Now she was truly alone. The local social services gave her a white cane and taught her some basic skills. They told her about guide dogs, but the waiting list was 2 years long. They showed her how to use a special phone that talked to her and how to organize her apartment so she could find things. But no one could teach her how to deal with the loneliness that ate at her heart every day. Money became a problem quickly. She couldn't go back to teaching right away. The school said they needed time to figure out how to accommodate her disability. Her savings ran out fast, and the small disability check barely covered rent and food. She had to choose between buying groceries and paying the electric bill. Maria had heard about the weekend market downtown. People said you could find cheap vegetables and day-old bread there. She had never been there before losing her sight, but now she had no choice. The first time she tried to go, she got lost 3 blocks from her apartment. A kind stranger helped her home, but she felt embarrassed and defeated. She practiced the route for days, counting steps and memorizing sounds. The bus stop was 47 steps from her door. The bus ride took 12 minutes. From where the bus dropped her off, it was 93 steps to the market entrance. She wrote these numbers down in Braille on a small card she kept in her pocket. The market was overwhelming when she finally made it there. The sounds hit her like a wave, vendors shouting prices, children crying, cars honking, music playing from different stalls. The smells were intense too. Fresh fish, ripe fruit, frying food, flowers, and things she couldn't identify. People rushed past her, sometimes bumping into her without apologizing. Finding what she needed was nearly impossible. She couldn't see the price tags or tell if the fruit was fresh. Some vendors were patient and helpful, describing their products and guiding her hands to feel the vegetables. Others seemed annoyed and spoke quickly, making her feel like she was bothering them. She bought what she could afford and hoped for the best. The trip home was exhausting. Carrying groceries while using her cane was difficult. She had to stop several times to rest and make sure she was going the right way. By the time she reached her apartment, she was emotionally and physically drained. But she had done it. She had gone to the market alone and survived. That night, as she put away her groceries, Maria felt a small spark of hope. Maybe she could learn to live this new life after all. She didn't know that her next trip to the market would change everything. She didn't know that sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us exactly where we need to be.